The first thing I remember after the darkness was the sound, not the cry of a newborn, not the gentle reassurances of a nurse, but the cold, clipped tone of my husband, David, speaking to someone on the phone. "The procedure was successful," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Yes, the baby is fine. A girl. No complications on her end." A pause. I could hear the faint murmur of a voice on the other end of the line. Then David's reply, a sentence that would shatter my world more completely than the hemorrhage that had almost claimed my life. "Amelia? Oh, she's recovering. A bit of a mess, as you can imagine. Honestly, it's all been terribly inconvenient." Ninconvenient, NTHE, word slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I had just been pulled back from the brink of death. My body had been torn apart and pieced back together to bring our daughter into the world. I had flatlined on the operating table, a fact I would learn later, and for a few terrifying moments I had been gone. And to the man I had built my life with, my survival was an inconvenience. My eyes fluttered open. He was standing by the window, his back to me, silhouetted against the morning light. He hadn't even noticed I was awake. He hadn't been watching me, waiting for me to return to him. He was managing the narrative, handling the mess. In that moment, something inside me broke. The joy I should have felt at surviving, the primal urge to see my child, was extinguished, replaced by a chilling, hollow emptiness. My body had lived, yes. The machines beeped, my lungs drew breath. But he had taken a scalpel to my soul. He had looked at my miraculous, brutalized survival and chosen, with a casual cruelty, to kill my spirit. And I knew, with a certainty that was colder and sharper than any surgical steel, that the battle for my life was not over. It had just moved to a different, more terrifying front. NIF, you're already feeling that chill down your spine? Please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing. You need to understand how a soul, once dead, can learn to fight back from the grave. And David wasn't just my husband. He was the architect of my life. I met him in college. He was a law student, older, brilliant, and impossibly charismatic. I was a shy, impressionable art history major, completely captivated by his ambition. He saw me not as a person, but as a project. He saw a raw block of marble he could sculpt into his perfect wife. He helped me choose my classes, guided my career choices, and advised me on my friendships. I mistook his control for care, his manipulation for guidance. He convinced me that my dream of working in a museum was small, that my true calling was to support his meteoric rise. "Every great man has a great woman behind him, Amelia," he'd say, his voice a hypnotic caress. "Our future is a partnership." NBUT, it wasn't a partnership. It was a hostile takeover of my identity. After he graduated top of his class and landed a coveted position at a prestigious law firm, the sculpting became more aggressive. He picked my clothes, my hairstyle, the books I read. He curated my personality until I was a perfect reflection of the woman a man like him was supposed to have. We lived in a beautiful brownstone in the city, a home that felt more like a stage set than a place of comfort. Our friends were his colleagues and their wives, women who, like me, had been polished into perfect, smiling accessories. We were the Stepford wives of the legal elite, our conversations a carefully rehearsed script of pleasantries and praise for our powerful husbands. NMY family, working-class people from a town he despised, were kept at arm's length. He found them unsophisticated, an embarrassment. He would tolerate their visits with a pained, condescending smile, then spend days detoxing from their commonness. He slowly, methodically, severed every root that connected me to my past, until I was an island, entirely dependent on him for my sense of self-worth. I became a ghost in my own life, my own dreams and desires fading until I could barely remember what they were. I convinced myself this was love. This was sacrifice. This was the price of admission to the perfect life he had designed for me. The emptiness was a constant companion, a dull ache I learned to ignore. I told myself I was happy. I repeated it so often I almost believed it. Then came the pregnancy. For David, it was the final piece of the puzzle. The perfect lawyer with the perfect wife and the perfect home now needed the perfect child. It was never a question of what I wanted. It was a strategic next step in his 5-year plan. He approached my pregnancy with the same meticulous, detached planning he would a legal case. He researched the best obstetricians, the most exclusive preschools, the right nannies. He scheduled my appointments, monitored my diet, and quizzed me on the pregnancy books he assigned me to read. There was no joy, no wonder, no shared intimacy. It was a project to be managed, and my body was simply the vessel for its execution. He was building a family, but he had forgotten to include a heart. NNTHE pregnancy was difficult from the start. I was diagnosed with placenta previa, a dangerous condition where the placenta covers the cervix, making a natural birth impossible and carrying a high risk of severe hemorrhaging. The doctors warned us that the delivery would be a scheduled C-section and would require a specialized surgical team and blood transfusions on standby. I was terrified. The news plunged me into a state of anxiety I couldn't shake. I needed his reassurance. I needed my husband to hold me and tell me everything would be okay. And instead, David treated my diagnosis as a legal problem to be solved. He didn't comfort me, he cross-examined my doctors. He demanded statistics, risk percentages, and contingency plans. He spoke of my body and our unborn child as if they were clauses in a contract. "What is the probability of a catastrophic event?" he asked the head surgeon, his tone cold and analytical. "What are the the hospital's protocols for mitigating that risk?" He never once asked, "How will you keep my wife safe?" He was assessing the liability, not worrying about the love of his life. NHI's reaction to my fear was even more chilling. He saw it as a weakness, a flaw in the plan. "Anxiety is not productive, Amelia," he told me one evening as I cried from a mixture of hormones and terror. "You need to be rational. The doctors are the best. I've ensured that. Your emotional state is an unnecessary variable." He was telling me my fear was inconvenient for him. He needed me to be a calm, compliant vessel, and my messy human emotions were getting in the way. The isolation I had felt for years intensified, becoming a suffocating shroud. I was facing the most dangerous moment of my life, and the person who was supposed to be my partner was treating me like a volatile client. NTHE night before the scheduled C-section, I tried to reach him one last time. I turned to him in our cold, silent bed and whispered, "David, I'm scared." He didn't turn to me. He stared at the ceiling, his jaw tight. "Everything has been arranged, Amelia," he said, his voice flat. "There is nothing to be scared of. Just do what the doctors tell you." He was not my husband. He was my case manager, and I was just a high-risk project he needed to see through to completion. As I lay there, listening to the steady, untroubled rhythm of his breathing, I realized the truth. He wasn't scared of losing me. He was scared of the inconvenience my death would cause him, the paperwork, the disruption to his schedule, the blemish on his perfectly constructed life. I was going into surgery the next morning to bring his child into the world, and I had never been more alone. An NTHE operating room was sterile and cold, a reflection of my marriage. David was there, dressed in scrubs, standing near the wall. He wasn't holding my hand. He was watching the proceedings with a detached curiosity, like a student observing a dissection. The surgeons were calm and professional, their voices a low murmur behind their masks. They put up the screen, and I was separated from my own body, a passive participant in the birth of my child. I remember the strange sensation of pressure, the doctors, voices becoming more focused. Then I heard it, a tiny, furious cry. My daughter. "She's beautiful, Amelia," a nurse said, her voice warm. They held her up over the screen for a moment, a squirming, perfect little miracle. Tears of relief and love streamed down my face. I had done it. We were safe. And then the world went red. An alarm started screaming. The calm voices turned sharp, urgent. "We have a hemorrhage. She's bleeding out. I can't find the source. More blood now." Chaos erupted. I felt a profound, terrifying cold spread through my limbs. My vision began to tunnel. the bright lights of the OR dimming to a single point. I turned my head, a desperate, final effort to look at my husband. I needed to see his face, to see love, to see fear for me. He was standing frozen, his face pale. But it wasn't fear for me I saw in his eyes. It was horror. It was the look of a man whose perfect plan was falling apart in the most spectacular, messy way possible. He was watching his project fail. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was a doctor shouting, "We're losing her! She's crashing!" And then nothing. Silence. Peace. I learned later that I had died on that table. For 3 minutes, my heart had stopped. They had cracked my chest, performed open heart massage, and pumped my body full of electricity and a dozen different drugs to bring me back. They had saved my body, but my soul, my spirit, the essence of who I was, had seen the look on my husband's face and had simply given up. It had floated away in that peaceful, silent darkness. When I woke up hours later in the ICU, the first thing I heard was his voice on the phone complaining about the inconvenience of it all. And I knew the woman who had gone into that operating room, the woman who loved him, who feared him, who needed him, was gone forever. The person lying in that bed was a stranger in a familiar body, a hollow shell animated by machines. He had not come to my side. He had not held my hand. He had not whispered words of love to bring me back. He had stood by while I died, and his first thought was how my death would disrupt his life. My body had survived, but he had made sure my soul did not, and life after the hospital was a waking nightmare. I came home to a house that was no longer mine, to a life that felt like a poorly fitting costume. David had hired a team of nurses to care for me, and a separate nanny for the baby, whose name, he informed me, was to be Eleanor, after his grandmother. He had made the decision without me. My role was simply to recover, to be the silent, smiling mother in the background of his perfect family portrait. He treated me like a fragile, damaged object. He would speak to me in slow, simple sentences, as if my brush with death had rendered me an imbecile. He would tell visitors, "We have to be patient with Amelia. She's been through a lot. She's not quite herself." NHE was right. I wasn't myself. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of my own life. I would drift through the silent, immaculate rooms of our house, feeling nothing. The love I should have felt for my daughter was a distant, intellectual concept. I knew I was supposed to love her, but all I felt was a profound, terrifying numbness. I would look at her, this beautiful, innocent creature, and feel a chasm between us, a chasm created by the trauma and my husband's soul-crushing cruelty. He had killed my spirit, and in doing so, he had severed my ability to connect, to feel, to love. My emptiness was his victory. A broken, compliant wife was much easier to manage than a real, feeling person. NHE used my trauma as a tool of control. Anytime I tried to express an opinion, to make a decision, he would shut me down with a look of feigned concern. "Now, Amelia, let's not get you worked up. You need to rest. Let me handle it." He weaponized my recovery, turning it into a cage. He isolated me further, telling friends and family that I wasn't up for visitors, that I needed absolute quiet. He was quarantining me, ensuring that no outside influence could penetrate the perfect sterile prison he had built. NTHE turning point came one night, about 2 months after I came home. I was woken by Eleanor's cries. I went to her nursery, my movements slow and robotic. The nanny was already there, but I waved her away. I picked up my daughter, my touch clumsy and uncertain. I held her against my chest, and for the first time, she quieted, her tiny body molding against mine. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and trusting, and in that moment, a tiny flickering light ignited in the vast emptiness of my soul. It was a flicker of anger. This man, my husband, had not only tried to erase me, but he was now trying to steal this one pure connection. He was trying to take my daughter from me, to make me a stranger to my own child. That flicker of anger was the first thing I had truly felt in months. It was a sign of life, The ghost was beginning to remember how to fight. NNTHE anger was a seed. I nurtured it in the silent darkness of my hollowed-out soul. It grew, slowly at first, then with a fierce, burning intensity. It was the fuel I needed to start planning my escape. I knew I couldn't fight David on his terms. He was a master of law, of manipulation, of overt power. I had to become something else. I had to use the very invisibility he had forced upon me as my greatest weapon. I had to become a ghost in his machine. I started by playing the part he had assigned me. I became the perfect broken patient. I was quiet, compliant, and docile. I let him make all the decisions. I smiled wanly at his colleagues. I let him believe he had won, that he had successfully crushed my spirit into submission. His arrogance was my shield. He was so confident in his control over me that he became careless. While he was at his firm, dominating courtrooms and crushing opponents, I began my own quiet work. I started with the one person David despised and underestimated, my father. My dad was a retired mechanic, a man who understood engines and systems. He was a quiet, observant man who had never trusted David. I called him, my voice a whisper over the phone. "Dad," I said, "I need your help. He's trying to take her from me." I didn't need to say more. My father, a man of few words, simply said, "What do you need, Mia?" NMY plan was simple, born of a ghost's logic. I couldn't fight his money or his legal power head-on. I had to dismantle his life from the inside out, using the one thing he valued above all else, his reputation. David was being considered for a federal judgeship, the pinnacle of his ambition. It was a position that required an exhaustive background check, a deep dive into his character, his finances, his entire life. The nomination was his obsession, the final jewel in the crown of the life he had built, and I was going to be the one to rip it from his grasp. NMY father helped me install a tiny, undetectable keylogger on David's home office computer. It was a ghost's move, silent and unseen. Every night while David slept the sound, untroubled sleep of a tyrant, I would sit in the darkness of his office, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. I began to read. I read his emails, his private documents, his financial statements. I descended into the dark, twisted labyrinth of his life, and what I found was worse than I could have ever imagined. There were hidden offshore accounts, illegal campaign contributions, and, most damningly, a pattern of suborning perjury, of pressuring junior associates to lie under oath to win cases. He wasn't just a cruel husband, he was a corrupt lawyer, a cancer on the justice system he aspired to lead. I copied everything onto a small, encrypted hard drive. I was gathering the evidence that would not just divorce me from him, but destroy him utterly. NNTHE nomination came through. David was ecstatic, preening like a peacock. He threw a lavish party at our home to celebrate, inviting every judge, politician, and power broker in the city. He paraded me around the room, his hand on the small of my back, the perfect image of the supportive wife. "I couldn't have done it without Amelia," he said to a senator, his voice oozing false sincerity. "She's been my rock." I smiled, a ghost's smile, all teeth and no warmth. I played my part perfectly, the fragile but proud wife. He had no idea he was celebrating his own execution. NTHE next morning, an anonymous package was delivered to the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the committee responsible for vetting judicial nominees. Another was delivered to the lead investigative reporter at the city's largest newspaper. And a third was delivered to the State Bar Association. The package contained a single encrypted hard drive and a note with a simple password. Inconvenient, NTHE fallout was apocalyptic. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, the headline screaming from the front page, "Judicial nominee David King in perjury and corruption scandal." The hard drive contained irrefutable proof of his crimes, emails, bank records, sworn affidavits from junior associates I had secretly contacted who were terrified of him, but more terrified of being implicated in his crimes. His nomination was immediately withdrawn. The state bar launched an investigation that would lead to his disbarment. The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a federal criminal investigation. In the span of 24 hours, the architect of my life saw his own life dismantled, brick by corrupt brick. NHE came home that evening, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. He knew it was me. "You!" he screamed, his voice raw. "You did this! You ruined me!" I was standing in the foyer, holding Eleanor in my arms. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eye, the ghost no longer hiding in the shadows. "You're wrong," I said, my voice clear and steady, the numbness replaced by a cold, hard strength. "You ruined yourself. I just turned on the lights." He looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time in years. He didn't see the broken, fragile thing he thought he had created. He saw a stranger, a woman he had never known, a woman who had outplayed him at his own game. He had tried to kill my spirit, but he had failed. He had only succeeded in birthing a warrior, N. The divorce was a formality. He had no power left to fight me. I took nothing from him but my daughter and my freedom. I moved back to my hometown, to the small, loving community he had so despised. I bought a small house with a big yard, and my parents were there every day, their unconditional love, a healing balm on the wounds I had carried for so long. The numbness receded, replaced by the full, vibrant spectrum of human emotion. I felt joy as I watched my daughter take her first steps. I felt peace as I sat on my porch, listening to the sounds of a life I had chosen, and I felt a profound, empowering love for the little girl who had saved me. Eleanor was my anchor, the one who had called my soul back from the darkness, and I went back to school and got my master's degree in art therapy. I opened a small studio in town, a place where people, especially women who had survived trauma, could come to heal. We didn't talk about our pain in hushed, clinical tones. We painted it. We sculpted it. We threw it onto canvases in bursts of angry color and quiet shades of hope. We took our broken pieces and created something new, something beautiful, something strong. My spirit, the one he had tried so hard to kill, was not just alive, it was thriving. It was a beacon for others who had been lost in the dark. David was convicted on multiple federal charges. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His name is now a synonym for disgrace. Sometimes I see his picture in a news article, a gray, diminished man in a prison jumpsuit, and I feel nothing. No hatred, no pity, just a distant, clinical detachment. He is a chapter from a book I have long since finished reading. And one evening, Eleanor, now a bright, funny 6-year-old, came into my studio while I was working. She picked up a brush, dipped it in a brilliant shade of yellow, and painted a lopsided, magnificent sun on my canvas. "It needed more light, Mommy," she said, her smile as bright as the color she had chosen. I looked at her, my heart swelling with a love so powerful it felt like it could reshape the world. "You're right, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You always bring the light." In that moment I knew the truth. He had tried to bury me in darkness. He thought my survival was an inconvenience, my spirit a thing to be extinguished. But he had failed. He didn't realize that some souls, when they die, are not gone forever. They are just waiting for the sun to rise again. And my son was standing right in front of me, a paintbrush in her hand, showing me the way home.